And close captioning. Okay. And so good morning, everyone. So my name is Renee. For those of you that don't know me, I'm with the John Humphrey Center for Peace and Human Rights, and we're excited. This is our first Stride webinar, so it's very nice to have everybody join on this way. Chad and I have done this, we've done this presentation a few times, and we tend to like to be quite interactive with this presentation. So what we'll do is, because I know on Zoom it can be hard to kind of with people's audio and stuff. So what I'll ask is if folks can just kind of keep themselves muted, and then if you have a question, feel free to like raise your hand or type in the chat box, and I'll pay attention there, and then we can kind of find our flow. All right, so we're just going to get started. So welcome everyone. I'm excited to have you all. And just acknowledging too, it's interesting because, you know, we go through these things where we do treaty acknowledgements where we stand, but here I think we are spanning Treaty 6, 7, and 8.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see us all. And I think it's kind of exciting while we're in a crisis that we're actually able to connect this way, and it's kind of forced us to connect this way. So it's really nice to see you. So I will just, I hope everybody can kind of see the screen. Okay, so this Rights and Policing webinar is a part of a project called Stride Advocacy that the John Humphrey Center has been doing for a couple of years. And really, all of these workshops are really to help support people at the grassroots level, people working in the front lines, to really know how to best advocate for your community, or how to pass the right education along to make sure community is aware of their rights in certain situations. So Stride, we have advocates all the way from Lethbridge to Slave Lake to St. Paul to Calgary and Edmonton and Red Deer. So it's a, you know, it's been a beauty of trying to, you know, build this space, but also build across the province. And I just want to acknowledge it's the Government of Canada has given us the capacity to do this work. And of course I have to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I think at the one on Monday, we have people from all over Canada.
Yes, the one on Monday was actually part of Writing Relations, which is a pan-Canadian network. Yeah, you're right, Sarah.
Yeah.
So just to start us off, I just wanted to quickly kind of review when we talk about human rights and what they mean. I know there's many, as all of you know, there's many different conventions and declarations and articles for different groups of people around human rights. But sometimes we like to just really ground it around looking at the 4 core principles of human rights. And when we think about human rights are those things that what people need to live a life of well-being, but also to achieve their full potential. So when we talk about human rights, there's really kind of 4 critical pillars of human rights. And you can see them here. One of those is about being the provision of the necessities of life. So that security, the right to security, those things like housing, food, shelter, those really kind of core needs that we need to be able to go that next step. Another piece is freedom, the right to freedom, so protection from the violation by others. And when we talk about this, there's that piece about violation of others between maybe 2 people, but then there's also the violation of rights by state agencies. And so the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms really exists as that document which protects us as citizens from abuse by the state. Whereas when it becomes between 2 individuals per se, it's more looking into criminal law or other kinds of law. And then we also have human rights legislation and stuff which exists to kind of support business, you know, to address protection in relation to businesses and stuff like that. Third pillar is that right to dignity. And what we mean by the right to dignity is that we all have the right to participate in the decisions that affect us. So whether it's like being in a school and making sure that we can participate in our education, but also be part of those decisions that affect us, or whether it's even in the doctor's office and having that right to participate in the decisions about your health and your body. So that participation ranges from things like right to vote, but just those things in the everyday as well. And that we all have voice and we should have voice in all those decisions that affect us. And then finally, the 4th pillar, which I think is a really critical pillar, is this idea of the right to justice. So this idea of, if we have our rights violated, we need to have spaces where we can seek remedy. If we don't have spaces where we can seek remedy, then really we kind of don't have rights. So this piece about remedy is critical. This is where we get into pieces about looking at different complaint processes or using the justice system and stuff. So these 4 pillars are kind of really critical when we want to think about human rights, so we can understand the breadth of it and how it is a really holistic concept and a universal concept, and that it holds us all. While we have all these different conventions and that support different groups, such as rights of persons with disabilities or children, those pieces, this idea that human rights is a broader construct is that it's for us all, and needs to be a holistic vision. So today we're going to talk about rights and policing, and I'll let Chad introduce himself in a minute. But what I wanted to kind of quickly get across to you, and I'm going to send a document to everybody who's on, some electronic documents that you can kind of refer to after this. But in relation to policing, there's no specific international convention or treaty that really defines all the rights in relation to policing. However, it is intertwined within many different conventions. So Canada is party to 7 international human rights treaties, which really kind of lay some frameworks for the rights around policing. So there's a UN Center for Human Rights that's developed human rights standards for law enforcement, which really kind of synthesizes all those pieces of the different 7 conventions that we are party to. And that is a document I'll send you, and it talks about those rights around arbitration and detention. So what Chad is going to talk about, and even when we reflect on the charter, is kind of coming from and is fed through and informed by this international architecture of human rights. So I'm not going to take up too much more space, because I think the fun stuff is getting into these conversations and getting into having a good conversation with Chad. So I am gonna pass the mic over to Chad, and we will get moving. And hopefully I can figure out the closed captioning today.
Well, you figured it out last time, so you should be able to do it again.
Good morning, everybody. So as Renee mentioned, my name is Chad Haggerty. And I'll give you a little bit of background about myself and why I'm doing this. So if you want to pop to slide 3, Renee, I think we can go there.
Where is it?
Should be the next one.
Okay.
There we go. So I'm Métis. I'm from Northern Alberta, a small Métis settlement. There are 8 in the province, and I happen to be from one of them. I was with the RCMP for about 17 years. Started when I was 19. Spent 14 of those years working on, as you see on the slide, Indigenous communities in Northern Alberta, including my hometown, High Prairie. Worked there for about 8 months before we realized that was not fun. So when I was in the RCMP, had ended up going through some incidents where I was shot at and stabbed and attacked with a bat, and all of the fallout from that. Unfortunately, one of the bits of fallout was that I wasn't able to moderate my emotions very well, and ended up getting charged with domestic violence, assault. Thankfully, my wife is okay. Our ex-wife now is okay. We still get along. In fact, I got a text from her just as the presentation was starting. We still chat frequently, and part of the reason for that was because I left the RCMP and went into therapy and tried to deal with a bunch of the issues that had arisen during my life, both before and during policing. Decided to go to law school. Decided to try to go to law school, was successful, and graduated last May. I worked last summer with Sitar Milcharek, a criminal defense firm in Calgary. In November, I switched to another firm because I wanted to do more trial work. And I've been working with them, running trials and representing people on the front line since November. So I need to clarify at the outset that I am not a lawyer. I'm a student at law. So I can give legal information. I cannot give legal advice. This presentation was prepared by Kate and Tom Engel, who are criminal defense lawyers based out of Edmonton. Although they do work throughout Northern Alberta, I know they will travel to other parts of the province if and when required. So some of the information in the presentation, or most of the information in the presentation, either comes through them or has been run through Kate or Tom or one of the lawyers that I work for. So I do prefer an interactive presentation. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please speak up. I know we want to avoid people talking over one another. So if you can mute your microphone, and either in the chat box, which I've got up in a separate window, or just speak up and politely interrupt, or not so politely, depending on how serious the question is. And we'll take little paths off to the side if need be. Renee is really good at getting me back on task. So if there are no questions to begin with, if you do have a personal story, just to protect everybody's dignity, integrity, and privacy, if your story could be about a friend, that would be great. So unless there are questions at the outset, I think we can launch into the presentation in general. Sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So Renee mentioned the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and she mentioned international conventions. So if you see me look off on my right, I've got notes, and on my left, I've got a second screen with the PowerPoint. So if I'm looking around, I'm not distracted. I'm just looking at various sources of information. So Renee mentioned the 7 international treaties that Canada has signed on to. The thing to remember is that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Constitution, is the foundational document in Canada. It is supreme to every other law, and every law drafted in Canada has to comply with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So in the context of this presentation, we'll focus on the fact that people have inherent rights, and those rights are set out largely in up to Section 15 of the Charter. And the most relevant rights to this conversation are 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 14. And I'll talk about what those are in just a moment. The main thing to take away from this is that the Charter protects the rights, as Renee said, of individuals against abuses by the state. So the state could be the government itself, the active arm of the government, which is often referred to, I mean, that's how police are often referred to. They're the ones enforcing the law and taking people to task for violations of the law. Police are the ones taking people into custody, arresting, detaining them, and unfortunately all too often engaging in other actions that could infringe on individual rights. So next slide, please, Mr. Renee. So I mentioned the rights that we're going to be focusing on. Section 7 is the right not to have your life, liberty, or security of the person infringed on. So what are those? I mean, that's pretty language, but what does it actually mean? And the courts over the years have fleshed out what that means. The biggest ones, for the purpose of civilian interaction with police agencies, is in red. It's the right to silence. So we've all seen television shows, movies where, usually it's American, and they're talking about your Miranda rights, the right to remain silent. We have that in Canada. We don't call it Miranda. Miranda was a case in the States that provided that foundation. But we still have it. It's protected by Section 7. So you have the right not to participate in a process that's targeting you. That's the right to silence. Section 8 is the right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure. They can't search your person. They can't search your property. A person's house is their castle. That doctrine does apply to some degree, and it's ensconced or encapsulated in Section 8. Section 9 is the right not to be detained arbitrarily. If police or agents of the state are going to stop you, detain you, they have to have a valid reason for that detention. And we'll talk more about that with some specific examples later in the presentation. Section 10A. So if they do, if the state does detain you or arrest you or stop you, you have a right to know the reason for that detention or that arrest. Building on that right is when you're arrested or detained, you have the right to speak to a lawyer without delay, and the police have to facilitate your access to a lawyer. Now, there are a couple of minor exceptions. If the detention is trifling, or if it's a short duration detention, police don't have to provide the right to contact counsel immediately. They don't have to tell you that you have the right to call a lawyer. So traffic stop, where even if there's a breath sample taken, and we'll talk more about that, they don't have to. And the courts have said that because it's such a minor detention or a minor infringement on your right, it's justified, and they don't have to do that. Section 11E is the right to reasonable bail. If you are detained and police are looking at keeping you in court, you have the right to an opportunity or to be released. Section 12, free from cruel and unusual treatment. Section 14 is one that most people don't hear about a lot, but in these presentations we find that they are. Section 14 is actually fairly significant. We do end up talking to marginalized populations, immigrant populations, populations where English or French is not the primary language spoken. Section 14 allows each individual the right to an interpreter so that they can understand the processes that are happening. So moving on, Cartman, this a little bit of an older screen. Cartman, respect my authority. It was sort of the penultimate example of a person in position of authority using that power in an inappropriate fashion. So that was thrown in there mostly because I think it's funny. Next slide, please. So we're going to get right into a couple of examples. And a good portion of this will be what happens when I interact with the police. Myself now, any of you, any of the people that you know, if you're interacting with the police, what rights do you have? What responsibilities do you have? So if you're walking down the street, a police officer stops you, asks for your name, where you're going, what you're doing, who you're with, what you're carrying, where you're coming from, any of those questions, there are a couple of things that we suggest. And the first suggestion is, am I free to go? That question is pivotal because if you're free to go, then you have no responsibility to answer any of the questions. If you're not free to go, you're in a situation where you're being detained. And once you're being detained, all of a sudden, all of those other rights are triggered. Section 10 is triggered. You need to know the reason. So if you're free to go, suggestion would be go, unless you want to have a friendly chat. And it's a really odd position for me now because I tried to be a friendly cop. I engaged people, I had pleasant conversations a ton of times. The vast majority of my interactions with the public when I was policing were positive, friendly. I worked in small towns, so I knew a ton of the people. Now, looking at police interactions from a different lens, from the lens of a defense lawyer, a prospective defense lawyer, I have no desire to talk to police unless there's something specific going on. I would prefer that the clients of our firm or the average person doesn't, because police interactions often have one purpose, and that purpose is to advance a police investigation. Is that always the case? No, but in order to protect your rights, in order to protect you from saying something that could advance a police investigation targeting you, often the best thing to do is, thanks, go on. The police officer's probably busy. They probably have other things to do. It feels rude not to talk to a police officer, but that's a mindset that when I was policing and police officers now use to their advantage. I'm just having a pleasant conversation. No, you're a police officer. You're an agent of the state. Your conversations are with purpose. It's like I said, it's difficult for me now to look back and advance that proposition, but it is the right one to take. So if you ask a police officer stops and wants to talk to you, asks you any of those questions at the top of the screen, am I free to go? And if you're free to go, go. I don't think there's any reason to engage. And if the officer says yes, you're free to go, then go. And if the officer doesn't answer that question, what do you do? And a lot of times the refusal to answer will come in the form of, why are you getting so defensive? What are you hiding? I'm just trying to be friendly. Cool. Be friendly with somebody else. I've got things to do. And I've counseled my daughter, my 12-year-old daughter knows this. If a police officer approaches her and starts talking to her, her first question will be, am I free to go? And if the answer is no, then her next thing is to call me. So if you're not free to go, ask why. Why am I being, I'm being detained? Why can't I leave? They'll give you whatever answer they'll give you. And the answer may be vague. It may be something like, I just want to have a chat with you. Well, no, if you want to have a chat with me, Mr. Police Officer, then you need a reason for that. And if you don't have a reason, then I am free to go. And then the next thing to do, if you're not free to go, ask why, and then advise that you want to talk to a lawyer. That's it. Now, if it could be for a valid reason, it could be anything, jaywalking, seeking your transit pass, or if you're driving, a driver's license. Now, if you're driving, you do have some responsibilities. We'll get into those shortly. But other than providing your name to the officer, remain silent. Name and date of birth, probably, so that they can verify who you are. Beyond that, don't say anything. And it seems odd to refuse to answer innocuous questions. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? You don't know what the police officer's investigating. They might be friendly. They might just be wanting to chat, and with social isolation, especially, having people to talk to is kind of a novelty. But they may be investigating something. You don't know what they're investigating. You say you're coming from the west, or behind you. Something may have happened over there that you're not aware of. You may loosely match the description of the person. You may not match the description of the person at all. But you've just said, I'm coming from direction X, and if something happened in direction X, now they've got a way to substantiate advancing their investigation, asking you further questions. So even innocuous questions should be avoided. And so, like we say there, just other than providing your name, don't provide any other information. And do remember that officers are allowed to lie. They don't have to tell you that they're investigating anything. They don't have to tell you, that you may be a suspect if you answer questions. And largely they won't. So are there any questions about that? Does it sound kind of paranoid not to provide any information to police officers? Because
feel free to use chat.
Okay.
Just a reminder, if anybody, just feel free to put your hand up or use chat. Yeah.
Yeah. So Robinson's mentioned they just get mean. You're absolutely right. You're right. If and so I've done this presentation with my 12-year-old, partly as practice and partly because I want her to have the information. And she said the same thing. She said, Dad, it's like, if you ask me a question, if you're like the police officer and you ask me a question I don't answer, then you get your dad voice on. And she's right. And police officers do the same thing. All of a sudden the attitude changes and you become, I apologize for the coughing. I am in quarantine for a reason. So thankfully it was just a flu, but still got a bit of a cough. Yeah, Robinson and Janice are right. They do get mean and the tone changes. So how do you address that? There are a couple of things to do. If you're free to go, leave. If they say that, you know, you have to answer the questions, keep asking why. And then go back to the simple steps. Am I free to go? Yes or no. I'd like to talk to my lawyer, and I'm not saying anything further. So you can not say anything, which provides them no information, and could escalate things. You could say, I know my rights. We've all watched movies and television where somebody has said to a police officer, I know my rights. That never turns out well, because then it becomes a headbutting competition and it's force A against force B. And the police officer is likely going to win that competition in the first instance, at least, because they have the handcuffs, they have the guns, they have the pepper spray, taser, et cetera, and they have authority vested in them by law. So saying I know my rights is probably not an effective way of dealing with the situation. You can assert your rights without stating that you know your rights. And a lot of police officers will hear, I know my rights as a challenge. I know my rights too, and I know your rights, and I'm going to exert my control over you to the degree that I'm allowed. So what's a more effective way of dealing with that? Again, go back. Am I free to go? If I'm not free to go, I'd like to speak to my lawyer. My name is blank. My lawyer told me not to say anything to you. Now, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not your lawyer, and that's very careful. You know, you have to be very careful about that. But there are many lawyers, both real and fictional, who have said that, you know, don't say anything to police. There's a video that went around, 4, 5, 6 months ago. Shut the blank up Friday. It's good advice. Don't say anything, and you can tell the officer, my lawyer, you know, my lawyers said not to talk to you, or you know, lawyers have said don't talk to police, something like that, because then at least, you know, you're borrowing authority from somebody else, from another agent, another person who, you know, who you're accepting the advice of the nebulous lawyer, quote unquote, and you're just asserting your right to silence. You're asserting your right not to be involved in processes that may target you. So the good thing about that is it sort of transfers some of the lack of cooperation, because that's how it'll be seen by the police officer. It transfers some of the lack of cooperation from you to this third party, to the nebulous lawyer. You're not talking because somebody else told you not to talk, and somebody, you know, with some knowledge. I like Robinson's comment, in the tone of my parents. My parents taught me not to talk to strangers. It's so much of it comes through in tone. Thanks for that, Robinson. It's, if you say it, you know, with a kind, with a kind voice, with a kind interaction, then that's fine. William has asked on the chat, are we allowed to video record? Also, what if we don't have a lawyer? So if you don't have a lawyer, and most people don't, quite simply say, um, there's a firm out of Vancouver, Acumen Law. Kyle and Paul actually sell T-shirts that say, "My lawyer told me not to talk to you," and you don't have to have a lawyer. You don't have to tell. You don't have to have a lawyer to say this. I mean, I love the T-shirt. I still haven't gotten one. I have to, and it's just good advice. So you don't actually have to have a lawyer. If the police can lie to you, yeah, you can lie to them a little bit too. I wouldn't recommend it to a great deal, but you can tell them, lawyer told me not to talk to you. That's it. Video recording. If you're engaged with police, you can record the interaction. So there are a couple of things that protect you there. The first is that we're a one-party consent jurisdiction, so you can record things as long as one person party to the conversation has given consent. You're party to the conversation, you've given consent. The other thing is that most of these interactions are going to be going on in public. If you're sorry, William is not William. William is Catherine. My apologies. Thanks for the clarification. Most of these interactions are going to be going on in public. So because it's in public, your reasonable expectation of privacy, or the police officer's reasonable expectation of privacy, is diminished. So yes, record. Now, I wouldn't recommend, sticking the camera in their face. Sorry, my pen. Sticking the camera in their face and doing it that way. But you can casually hold your phone beside and tell them, just so you know, I'm recording this. Again, it doesn't have to be. So much of it comes down to tone, as Robinson said. Just so you know, I'm recording this for my protection and yours. I don't know what's going to happen, and I just want to have a record of it. And if you say it with that tone, with that language, it's hard to look at it at any point, at the time or in hindsight, and say that William or Catherine or Robinson was being uncooperative and aggressive. So one of the things to bear in mind is that uncooperative and aggressive are frequently used words that are subject to interpretation and justify a lot of police action. I don't think I ever had a forceful arrest where the person was cooperative, because that's contrary to logic. And there were probably arrests where I probably went. I was probably sterner or more firm or a bigger jerk than I needed to be. And part of the justification for that would have been because the person was uncooperative. So again, am I free to go? If I'm not free to go, I'd like to talk to my lawyer. Other than that, lawyer told me not to talk to you. And if you say lawyer told me not to talk to you, you're not saying your lawyer, you're not saying which lawyer, you're just saying lawyer told me not to talk to you. Yeah, so sorry, I'm seeing there's a question from Heath and Sam above.
I were to ask if I can go and get no response, I'm a little unclear what to do. Can I leave? If I get
Thanks, Heath. So if you ask if you can go and you get no response, then the suggestion in that case would be ask again. And you can say officer or transit officer or security guard, whatever, security officer. If I'm allowed to leave, then I'm going to leave. And state it clearly, calmly, and then do it. That way, you've done everything you can. If you can record it, fantastic. And then again, go back to the same. Am I free to go? And until that question's answered, don't answer any other questions. Am I free to go? Can I leave? Am I allowed to just walk away now? And then go to the next step. Ask for the reason why you're not allowed to go, ask you be given counsel or lawyer. So the page that we're looking at, the page that Renee has up on screen, take a screenshot of that, tape it to the back of your phone, and if you get stopped by the police, just go through that script. We're going to repeat this over and over, or I'm going to repeat this over and over because it's great. Sam asked, when do you have to give them your name and date of birth? Before or after? Am I free to go? Also, what if you say you don't have a lawyer? Just say you do. So when do you have to give them your name and date of birth? When they ask for it, generally. So there will be times when police officers or security guards or transit authority or whoever will ask for your name when they don't have the lawful authority to do so. In my job now, I see that a lot. Your name is protected, and what they're going to do with your name is they're going to run you on whatever police information database the particular agency uses. They'll all run you on CPIC, which is the Canadian Police Information Center. They'll do that to see if you have warrants or a criminal history. Now, that's all well and good if they have a valid reason for stopping you. So if they have a valid reason for stopping you, then they're allowed to do that. If they don't have a valid reason for stopping you, then they shouldn't be running your information. Searching a database for information about you is something that can only be done when there's lawful authority to do so. That's protected under Section 8, the right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure. So there's that. The flip side of it is if you get to a point where a police officer or security guard or whoever is asking for your information, asking for your date of birth, if so this is where it gets a bit gray. Ideally, walk away. They would not do anything. Say, okay, I didn't have enough grounds to ask anyway, so see you later, random stranger. So the reality is, if a police officer gets to the point where they're asking for your name, they may have justification that you're unaware of, or they may not have justification, but they're going to do it anyway. So the other thing to keep in mind with this script that's on the screen, the other thing to keep in mind is, first thing you have to do is protect yourself, protect your physical safety. And if you get to a point where a police officer is asking your name and they're being stern and the attitude changes and they've taken on, as my daughter calls it, the dad voice. Don't get me wrong, in my family, mom voice was scarier than dad voice. But if they've changed their tone, provide your name and date of birth, because the consequences of not doing that could mean, arrested, an escalation of the physical interaction, and none of us want that. So at that point, resisting or refusing to provide name and date of birth is not worth the hassle that'll come from not providing it. So I think everybody that I've seen on video, at least, looks like you're an adult. So you've had some experience interacting with other people, and if you've had experience interacting with other people to some degree, you can probably read the situation. So play it safe. If it gets to the point where they're demanding name and date of birth, give it, but then provide nothing more. And there are there's a lot of lawful authority that would allow police officers to get that information or to ask for that information, and it'd be splitting hairs at this point to not provide that. Janice says, same rules apply to police, security, and peace officers. So to some degree, there are differences. The differences for the average citizen is when dealing with anybody in uniform or anybody who's security, transit, police. So can vary, but the differences are so vague or nebulous that I'm not sure I would suggest anybody. And the information that I would provide is that ultimately, whether it's through their status as a peace officer, as a police officer, or their right. So security guards or bouncers at a bar, for example, they have rights to protect the property of the people they're working for, and also to take steps to get ID and what have you, for people coming onto the property. So by and large, I know a lot of people, refer to, say, transit authority officers or bylaw enforcement officers with, negative comments about, the wannabe police officer and what have you. The thing is, they do have lawful authority to do their job and to do a lot of the things that police officers do. And the best way to approach those things would likely be to be the most respectful person in the interaction. That doesn't mean sucking up to them or kissing butt. It just means be respectful. Expect that they have the authority, and then respond that way. The nice thing is, if you do all of these steps the same way for a security guard as you would for a police officer, you stand the best chance of protecting your rights while respecting the person before you. Whether it's a security officer or a police officer, am I free to go? If you are, go. If you're not, why are you detaining me? I want to speak to a lawyer. Name and date of birth if it comes to that, and other than that, nothing. So that'll work if it's a police officer who has the highest amount of trust and authority vested in them, and it'll also work if you're dealing with a security guard. Okay, so Chelsea says, in their experience, they get asked for ID first. When they have no ID, they ask for a name. What are the consequences for giving a fake name? Okay, so if somebody if a police officer or security guard, whoever, just approaches you and asks for ID, same thing. Am I free to go? No, give me your ID. Okay, why do you need my ID? I don't understand why you're asking for it. They'll tell you and say, okay, well, if you have to give it, if they give you a lawful reason, I saw you jaywalking, I saw you littering, whatever, you can give it to them, and then you ask for a lawyer. If you give a fake name, there are a few charges that can result from that. One of the charges is personation, pretending to be somebody that you're not. Another is obstructing a peace officer. So, preventing a police officer from engaging in a lawful investigation. So the consequences of giving a fake name will be arrest, potentially criminal charges, criminal conviction, and a criminal record. So those are things that are going to come from that. Now, if you're not giving your name because you have outstanding warrants or you have a criminal record, and you're concerned that if they know those things, you're either going to get arrested or the attention they give you is going to change. That's, those are valid concerns. Ultimately, if you have to give your name, giving the right name is going to lead to fewer consequences than giving a false name. Because if you give a false name or a fake name and they find out, you're still going to have to deal with the consequences that would have come if you'd given your own name, and you're also going to have to deal with the consequences of obstructing the peace officer or personation. Anyway, Catherine asks if police have the authority to arrest without warrant. Yes, police officers can arrest without warrant, and that power is found in section 495 of the criminal code. So police can arrest without warrant somebody that they find committing a criminal offense. Criminal code is just off to my right. I'm not going to grab it because ultimately, you can find it online. Section 495 Criminal Code, they can arrest without warrant. If they find you committing a criminal offense, if they know that you've committed an offense in the past, and they have lawful reasons, they absolutely can. So asking to see the warrant, or asking if there's a warrant if a police officer is trying to arrest you, that's not going to help things at all. And kind of a bit of a tangent there, sorry about that, Renee. But we can pop to the next screen, which is pertinent to this conversation. Okay, so one of the other things that's been happening for the past few years is that police officers will take the ID and they'll take a photograph of it. So if you're not detained or arrested or under investigation, and if you're being detained, it could be, I saw you jaywalking, give me your ID. That's a detention. They're stopping you from leaving. If the officer gets a hold of your ID, whether it's for whatever reason, and tries to take a photograph, object to it. As I said, with doing computer searches on your information, it's protected by Section 8 of the Charter, unreasonable search and seizure. It's a violation of provincial privacy laws, and it shouldn't happen. So, because what happens is once they take a picture of your ID, that's in state custody, in police hands, or what have you. And personally, I don't want the cops having my ID. It's not comfortable for me. It's not something that I want, so I would avoid it. And then go back to the main things. Am I free to go? Why am I being detained? I'd like to talk to my lawyer. Lawyer told me not to talk to you. Next one, I think. So this is probably, I mean, we've kind of talked about all this a little bit. So again, you'll see the pattern developing on this screen, right? If they tell you you're under arrest, ask why you're being arrested. Tell them that you want to talk to your lawyer, and stay silent. Name, date of birth. If they're arresting you, they probably know what it is. If not, if they're arresting you for something you don't know what it is, give them that information, because they may think you're somebody else. If you have ID, give it to them. So a lot of times what will happen with an arrest, people think that if you arrest, you automatically go downtown, you know, the TV downtown. Not necessarily. A lot of the things that you can be arrested for, you can be released immediately. Either with a promise to appear, or an appearance notice, or some form of paperwork that tells you when your court date is, and if or when you have to go to have your fingerprints taken because of the charges. So, but again, whether you're arrested or just stopped for a conversation on the street, same things. Am I free to go? If you're under arrest, no. Why am I being arrested or detained? I'd like to talk to my lawyer. Lawyer told me not to talk to you. Make sense? Yeah. Honestly, I think we could sum up this whole PowerPoint with like with those points. That's it.
And I think, can I add in a piece, Chad?
Please.
I just really want to emphasize this piece in the capital letters about remaining silent, because you know, fellow colleague of mine, Tom Engel, who does a lot of work on this, always talks about some of the greatest challenges he finds in defending his clients is when they don't remain silent. And so, you know, they say something, they're, you know, trying to, you know, engage or be polite to the police officer, and as much as it feels impolite not to talk, you have every right to remain silent. And knowing that oftentimes when we don't remain silent is when it can go into different places. So I just really want to emphasize that one big time. Okay.
Absolutely. And as you said it earlier, it seems rude, it seems impolite. Absolutely. Human nature, by and large, is to engage with the people around you. And we're seeing how difficult it is not to do that these days. I mean, I'm quite a homebody, and even I'm starting to get a little crazy being at home for the last couple of weeks. And I mean, my partner is on the autism spectrum, and she's incredibly happy with how society looks right now. Personally, I'd like a little more interaction, but remain silent. The thing is, a lot of people think, well, if I just explain to them, if I just explain to the police officer what I'm doing now or why, I can talk my way out of this. They just need to understand. I had if you are being investigated for something, and a lot of people think, well, if they knew my side of the story, they would understand what happened, and I'd be in the clear. No, that's not what happens. Police officers, I didn't, as much as I would like to think that I did my investigations when I was a police officer with a view of finding the truth and just putting the truth before the court, the reality is you pick a target, and the information leads you in a direction, and you follow that direction, and then confirmation bias plays in, recency bias plays in. And of course, if you're talking to somebody, they're going to tell you a story that makes sense of the situation, because people lie, and people that commit criminal offenses lie. That was sadly, unfortunately, a mindset that I had far too frequently when I was a police officer, and it's a mindset that I see in the files that I'm dealing with now. You cannot talk your way out of something that a police officer's done. Your best bet is to stay silent. Let a lawyer or somebody, a lawyer, talk to police if that's a wise decision. The other thing is that if a lawyer talks to a police officer, that what's said can't be used against you. You're not the one saying it. The lawyer's the one saying it. So yeah, remain silent is capitalized on this page for a reason. And thanks, Renee, for making sure that was highlighted. Nexi says, I've heard police officers are taking photos of ID because of the current situation. Is this permitted? Do they have a right to take a photo ID to avoid social interaction? No, that doesn't change anything. I mean, the pandemic, there are things that could happen that would change the authority of police officers, but those things haven't happened. I mean, instituting essentially martial law, I think we saw that in the October crisis in the early 70s, briefly. But that hasn't happened yet. It doesn't change anything. Your rights as a citizen, your rights under the charter are still, sacrosanct. If a police officer wants to take a photo of your ID and they're trying to justify it because of COVID or the pandemic, or need to avoid social interaction, they can talk to you from 6 feet away. If they haven't undertaken the necessary steps to protect their personal their personal safety using proper protective equipment, that's on them. It's not your responsibility, and they don't get to infringe on your rights simply because they haven't done what they could or should do to protect themselves. So yeah, I hope that answers that question, Lexi. And let's see. Yeah, so next screen. Yep. So if the police officer wants to search search your bag, what do you do? So again, it's a search of you or your bag is protected by Section 8. So never consent. If you consent to searching your bag, your pockets, your vehicle, whatever, a lot of times the consent will give police that allowance. Now it has to be informed consent, and it could still be argued, but they're going to search your stuff, and never consent to it. There's no reason. If the police officer has a valid lawful authority to search, they'll get judicial authorization, which is a warrant, or they'll arrest you, and if they don't have the grounds to arrest you, they don't have the grounds to search your bag generally. So the other thing that'll happen a lot is if a police officer has a valid reason for stopping you, say it's jaywalking, littering, whatever. A lot of times they'll say, oh, can I pat you down? I'm going to pat you down for officer safety. Again, object. Now, if it's, you know, male female or female male, or if there's a gender imbalance, a power imbalance based on gender in whatever form that takes. I know a lot of times transgendered individuals have an historic mistrust of police, as do immigrant populations or indigenous people. So if there's a power imbalance, you can ask for, can I get another officer here? Can I get an officer of, you know, the same gender, or a gender that I'm comfortable with? Now, I mean, I'm a cisgendered, you know, heterosexual, white-appearing male. I can't ask for a female to search me because it's a gender I'm more comfortable with. I mean, in the context of a police search. So, again, object to the search, and if you're free to go, go. Ask them why. If they persist in wanting to search your bag or your person, ask why. Ask to call a lawyer. Now, very often what'll happen if it's a frisk search or an officer safety search, they're not going to let you call a lawyer. They're not going to let you leave, and they're probably going to do the search. So the reason I say they're probably going to do the search, I can bounce back to what I said a few minutes ago. Very often, what it comes down to is they have power and authority, and they're going to use it. And that's a horrible statement, but it's a true statement. If a police officer decides they're going to search you or detain you, they're going to search you or detain you. So where does that leave you? That leaves you in a position where verbally object, don't provide consent, and record it if possible. And again, with the recording, although you're legally allowed to do it, if it raises the emotional situation, or if it raises the confrontational nature of the event, be careful. And I would try to keep recording, but if recording is going to lead to you getting beat by a cop, don't record. Be safe. As soon as the interaction's done, sit down and record yourself. Take a video of yourself saying what just happened. I tried to record this. The police officer, you could see what happened. You know, police officer told me not to, got really angry, yelled at me. So I didn't. It's now 2 minutes later. This is what happened. You know, on this date at this time, blah, 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 blah. So do the best you can in the situation. Protect yourself first, and go from there. Carrie, I do see your question about opinion of Bill 10. I go off topic enough, and Bill 10 would take an entire morning to discuss, I think, and so I see it. I'm not going to answer it, and I apologize for that.
Perhaps next week.
Yeah, maybe next week. So Catherine asked if you're allowed to help somebody who's a new immigrant and lacks their English is poor. They lack English and they don't understand. Yes. So yes, with an asterisk. So yes, you can offer to help somebody. Pay close attention to how your offer to help is accepted or received by the police officers. Okay. Offer to help, officer. Or even if it's a security guard or a bouncer or whatever, just excuse me. This individual doesn't speak. Their English is poor. Can I help translate? offers to help are good. They're generally well received. If it's not well received, become a very good witness. And by that I mean stand back, record the interaction if you can, and just watch the interaction to make sure that things don't go sideways. And if things do go sideways, you are there to make sure that it doesn't go too far, or hopefully it doesn't go too far. The reality is, a lot of times when police are engaging with people, when I was policing, and all of the friends that I had and still have, if they're witnesses, you behave differently. You put on a prettier face. You tone your language down a little bit. So just standing there and being a witness, being an uninvolved third party, letting the police officers know that the public is viewing this is that is helpful. That is a good thing. If a police officer arrests you and they're searching your person, or if they say they're going to search you down and they're doing it, you've objected and they're still going to do it. How do you know the search is going too far? Well, if they're reaching into pockets, that's usually too far. When you're under arrest, they can search for evidence or implements that would either harm them or allow you to escape or allow you to harm yourself. Basically, at that point, if you're being searched, just object to it politely. You don't have to yell. You don't have to be shouting or screaming. That's gonna escalate the situation. You can object quietly, firmly, but calmly, and that's probably the best way to go. When a search goes too far, at that point, you're likely going to have a lawyer involved, a defense lawyer, and even if you don't get charged, you can still contact a defense lawyer and say, "Hey, this happened. Do I have any recourse? Do I have any?" And Renee mentioned remedy when she was talking about the 4 pillars, and when she was referring to justice. So justice isn't just the criminal justice system. Justice is, how do things balance out, on the whole. If something happens, do you have recourse to deal with the something that happened? And a lot of times it becomes very technical. It comes down to legal niceties or legal degrees of what you can do or what can be done. And if you have an interaction with a police officer that doesn't go well, by all means, contact a defense lawyer. Every defense lawyer I know is willing to talk to somebody for at least a half hour, 15 minutes, a half hour for free, because they're number one, most defense lawyers I know, all defense lawyers I know, are very focused on access to justice and an appropriate justice system. The other thing to remember is that defense work, lawyering is a business, and if you call a defense lawyer or any lawyer and say, "This is what happened, what can I do?" they'll absolutely tie in. So give you a few minutes of their time. So next screen, Renee, please, and thank you. If you're stopped by police or arrested at school, so if you're still in school, if you're talking to your children or whoever, and they're in school, are rights different because you're in a school? Absolutely not. The charter, as I mentioned, is supreme law in the country. It applies to everybody. My 12-year-old knows that in addition to her right to call a lawyer, she also has a right to call a parent. And her comment was, "Great, so I get to call mom with my right to call a parent, and I get to call you with my right to call a lawyer." So sort of, but ultimately, a minor does have the right to have a parent and a lawyer. And that's one thing to keep in mind if you're under 18, or if you have people in your life that are under 18, and you can share that information with them. So next screen. if you're stopped in the bar, do your rights differ? And as I alluded to earlier, no, they don't. There are a couple of differences. The one difference is that a bar is a licensed establishment. It's a private property. The public has access to it by invitation, but the landlord or the bar owner or manager or bouncers on behalf of them may ask anyone for any reason to leave, and they can use reasonable force because they're protecting property. They may use reasonable force to escort somebody out or to pick them up and drag them out or whatever it is. So in that case, I mean, you can I see your question, Sarah. I'll come to that in just a moment. So in this, the PowerPoint that you're looking at is the one that we used in Lethbridge. This applies to Calgary and Edmonton and to RCMP as well. A police agent, the Gaming and Liquor Act allows bouncers or representatives of the bar owner authority to throw people out. They also allow police agents, so Lethbridge Police, Calgary Police, Edmonton Police, RCMP, they grant them the authority to act as an agent of the landlord or the bar owner and eject any patient for any reason. Now, that goes a little further when it comes to gang affiliation. As it says, Section 69.1 of the Gaming and Liquor Act gives police broad and vague powers to require any person to leave a licensed establishment when they believe there's a gang relation, and allow reasonable force to eject that person. So they're basically if somebody comes to your house and you ask them to leave, you're the owner of the house. You have every right, or you're the renter of the house. You're the person that lives there. You have every right to ask somebody to leave. Landlord, maybe not so much, but anybody else. And it's the same with the bar. They can ask anybody to leave, but for some reason in the Gaming and Liquor Act, they decided to harden the shell around police authority a little bit and grant police more authority when it comes to somebody that has suspected gang affiliation. Now, what is suspected gang affiliation? You friggin' name it. Apologize. You name it. Whatever a cop decides gives them suspicion of a gang affiliation is going to be gang affiliation. It's BS. It's used to harass people. It puts too much authority or discretion in the, yeah, Teresa, wow, it's yeah. I wish I knew you all better and I wish this wasn't being recorded because I need to swear when I talk about this thing. It just frustrates the hell out of me. So all that said, there are some differences in a bar because the landowner or the property owner is allowed to boot you with no reason, and they are allowed to use reasonable force. If you've been to a bar and you've seen somebody ejected, whether or not you'd agree that the force used was reasonable is, I would suggest, no. So I'm going to back up to Sarah's question. Does somebody with a disability have the right to call a worker? It depends on the disability. And it's one of those weird things where if somebody has a disability that affects them to the point where they would have a right to call a worker, then the worker would probably be with them at the time. Now, legally, all of the information I have is that it comes down to an age, and not mental age, but actual age. You know, if somebody is operating at a diminished capacity, that should factor in. It often does factor in, but not always. And what rights are there? So if your friends or acquaintances or family or whatever with somebody who's operating at diminished capacity and their disability would, in your mind, prevent them from understanding what's happening, by all means, advocate for them. Let the officer, security guard, transit authority, whoever it is, let them know that individual requires a worker to understand the situation. And that's about the best that you can do. And then if you see somebody, just a random stranger on the street who you want to help out, again, go back to the same things. Am I free to go? Am I being arrested or detained? What for? I want to talk to my lawyer. Lawyer told me not to talk to you. Teresa says, what's the difference between that and carding? And she's referring to the discussion earlier about police rights in a bar. The difference between that and carding, practically, absolutely nothing. So that's one of the issues that a lot of people have with Section 69.1 of the Gaming and Liquor Act, with the gang task force or the gang unit or the guns and drug, whatever stupid acronym the police agency has given their gang unit. Their whole reason for being is to card people, to harass people that they think are criminal, that they think are involved in a criminal lifestyle. I see that phrase, this individual's involved in criminal lifestyle. Get bent, bugger off. Like, that is such a stupid, that means nothing. But it provides so much authority to police officers when they engage in something. Seeing people that are described by police as living a criminal lifestyle, and then asking the police officer during cross-examination to describe what that actually means, I mean, crickets. They come up with the same BS. Oh, they involve people with a criminal record. They have a criminal record. Shut up. Get away from me. This is stupid. So how is that different than carding? It's not. These gang units, they live to card. That's what they do. That's all they do. That's it's so carding is stopping people, police stopping people on the basis of race, gender, nationality, appearance, essentially, for no lawful purpose. That's part one of this carding phenomena. Part two of the carding phenomena is inappropriately targeting individuals who are visibly different, visible minorities, disadvantaged, because it also happens to people who are financially disadvantaged or economically disadvantaged, not just by race and nationality, but inappropriately or disproportionately targeting those people. That's part two or part B of the carding phenomenon. It's gang affiliation can be used in conjunction with racial profiling. Carding can be used in conjunction with racial profiling. But and I can tell you, it the disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged portions of any community receive far more policing than the well-to-do areas. They're targeted differentially. They're charged at a greater rate than anybody else, and that's true of no matter the race. And of course, if you're a visible racial minority, it's even worse. I mean, Indigenous overrepresentation in the criminal justice system is bonkers. In 2014, 2015, it was about 23% of incarcerated people on the whole. That's, provincial, remand, and federal. It was around 23, 24% were Indigenous. And that's where, with Indigenous people making up about 3% of the population. Now, some figures are as high as 37% of incarcerated people being Indigenous and making up about 4% of the population. And that's there's so many. I mean, that could be a week-long seminar, or semester-long course. But yes, it is discriminatory. And how does it fit within the charter? So how it fits within the charter when it comes to police engaging somebody on the basis of race is there have been a couple of cases recently. The most high-profile one was a case of Regina versus Lee. So cases cases in Canadian criminal courts are referred to by the name of the accused person. And in Regina and Lee, the police officers had gone into the backyard of a group of people. They had approached them for no reason and asked to essentially started searching them. And so, sorry, I'm trying to pull up the case. I'll share it in the group chat when I have it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the court said that targeting people based on race is is inappropriate, and it can't happen. No matter what the people are doing, if the actions that the police take are premised in any way on the race of the individual, then the charter's engaged, obviously, and those actions, there's a very high standard for the police action to still be allowed. So when police infringe on the charter rights of an individual, it doesn't always mean that the police action is automatically struck. That the evidence that's seized or the charges automatically go away. Very often what happens is it'll come down to an analysis, where it balances the rights of the individual and the needs of society, to have crime investigated. And a lot of times things will be a charter violation, but Section 1 of the charter allows for infringements to happen if it's on the whole to the benefit of society. So where does that fit when it comes to racial profiling? Racial profiling, if anything, is premised on the race of the individual being targeted by police, there's a really good chance that the evidence seized or the charges, whatever, will be dismissed by the court. What does that mean for you in the moment on the street? It means that you're probably going to get arrested and charged. You're going to have to face state action and contact a criminal defense lawyer. So this isn't an advertisement for me or for anybody. There are resources that you can use to contact a criminal defense lawyer if you don't have one. You're more than welcome to contact Renee. You're more than welcome to contact me. Tom and Kate, who draft us, you're more than welcome to contact them. And normally what will happen is a reference will give you a reference to a lawyer that's in your area, or deals with whatever it is that you're dealing with. But do contact a lawyer if it gets to that point. If you're a visible minority, I mean, I'm Indigenous. So when I tell people I'm Métis, very often the question they ask was, well, how Indigenous are you? And I don't know. It's like 87.2%. I don't know. My mom was a victim of sexual assault. That's how come I look as white as I do. The rest of my family is very obviously Indigenous. So I don't know how Indigenous I am. I don't know how to answer that question. But I look like a white guy. And that has helped me in my life and in my career. So I can't deny that. I can't speak to what it's like to be, a true visible minority. The one thing I've got against me is my hairline and my ugly face, but that's not terrible. So if you're a visible minority, you're going to be disproportionately targeted. That's what social science tells us. That's what my personal experience tells me. And that's probably what you're experiencing tells you it's not. It's not. So your rights will be protected. They won't be protected in the moment. In the moment, what you can do is, am I free to go? Am I being arrested or detained? Why? I want to talk to a lawyer. The lawyer told me not to talk to you. So again, this is the point where, we would flash up the bright neon, those steps. And honestly, yeah, like 60-point font. We keep talking about getting these cards made up with those things on it, and at some point we really should do that. So appreciate the questions, absolutely on topic. Where are we? In a bar? Okay, driving. And we're going to move on to that one now. All right. Teresa, I like your questions, Teresa. How do you suggest, from my experience, how the perception of gang affiliation and carding can be changed amongst police officers? Teresa, I don't know how old you are, but are you old enough to know what an Etch-a-Sketch is? And then, you take the Etch-a-Sketch and you'd shake it, and that would like wipe the Etch-a-Sketch clean and get started over. That's the only way it's not going to change. And the reason it's not going to change is because the police officers are human beings, and human beings have an inherent, it seems inherent that we see things that are different, and we see them through, frankly, a shitty lens. We need to correct how we approach things on an individual level. And systemic, I did miss that, and I'm going to screw up your name, but I did miss a question about hard of hearing deaf. I will come back to that. So how is the carding, how is that going to be changed? It's going to change when society changes as a whole. It's a slow progression. Has it improved? It was. The last few years, it seems like it's backslid a bunch. Hopefully it'll come back. But how do we do that? If systemically things aren't going to change, then that's where defense lawyers, human rights lawyers, organizations like the John Humphrey Center, people like Renee, people like those of you that are on this, you're going to change it because police are going to be forced to listen to the voices saying you can't do that anymore. My dad was not a good person. He just was not a good person. But he said one thing that actually stuck in my head, and I kind of take this into my work in law. He always said that you're going to respect me, and if it's because you love me, great. If it's because you fear me, that'll work too. Now, a lot of times police officers seem to apply that, and I didn't like it then. I'm not saying I didn't use it then, I didn't like it. But now as a defense lawyer, I want police to feel that about people like us, people like those of us in this meeting, people like, defense lawyers, John Humphrey. You're going to respect human rights. If you're going to do it because you actually love human rights and you're invested, lovely. If you're going to do it because you're scared of the consequences of not respecting human rights, that'll work. So bouncing back to Dulita, I hope I said that close at least. So the question is, what rights are there for people who are deaf, hard of hearing? As a bystander, should you offer to interpret? I knew the alphabet in sign language. I actually did take an American Sign Language course because there were a couple of people in one of the towns I worked in that were deaf and signed. They were never in trouble, so I never used sign language there. When there were people around that were thanks. She said, I think it's she. I'm going to go with she. She said that I was close enough on her name. So if somebody stepped up and said, "Hey, can I help you? Can I help interpret?" Always happy to. The other thing is I would when I did deal with people who were deaf or hard of hearing, I would take my notebook and and so, can you write? Didn't want to assume that, or I would write, can you write, can you read? So that was sometimes effective. What rights do people who are deaf, hard of hearing have? Absolutely the same rights as everybody else. Absolutely the same rights, and that includes Section 14, the right to have an interpreter, and the right to access an interpreter so that they understand the process against them. Now, if you are deaf or hard of hearing, or if you have somebody in your life who is, then one of the things that you can do is print up a card, and whether it's an actual card or it's a piece of paper that you laminate with packing tape, something like that, a card that says, I'm hard of hearing, or I'm deaf, I can read and write, I can't read and write, I know American Sign Language, I don't know American Sign Language. And if they are dealing with somebody in a position of power and authority, like a police officer, security guard, bylaw officer, then presenting that card, holding that card out, and if the writing on it is large enough so it can be read from a few feet away, these days that's a good idea. Create that for them. That'd be a great way to assist your friends, your acquaintances who are dealing with unique challenges. Yep. Sorry, just scrolling back up through the Sam, yes, you're absolutely right. Right to Section 14, right to interpreter does include ASL. Maura, thanks for popping in today. Hope the rest of your day goes well. Any consequences for arresting officers that perform an illegal arrest, search, and seizure? Thanks, user. So, are there consequences? Yes. One of the things, so when I refer to talking to a lawyer, if something happens that you're not sure, even if you're not charged, talking to a lawyer to say, this happened, what do I do about it? If you're unlawfully detained, unlawfully searched, then there may be civil action that you can take. Civil action in the sense that a lawsuit. You can sue the police if they breach your rights. That happens frequently. Whether or not it goes anywhere depends on the facts of the case and the intricacies of that. There are consequences, and one of the other consequences besides a lawsuit is filing and this goes back to Renee's comment about remedy in a situation. Is there a way to redress wrongs that have happened? And we'll get into it in just a tiny bit, but yeah, making a complaint against a police officer to their policing agency, to ACERT, the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team, making a complaint to the Human Rights Commissions, the various Human Rights Commissions. Those are all things that could be counted as consequences. So, going to pop ahead to the next screen. And sorry, just finally going to be a little cognizant of the time. So we got about a half hour, so I'm going to kind of press on a little bit. So if a police officer wants to search your vehicle, essentially same thing. If it's a random stop, same as a person, generally they don't have grounds to. Now, if they see something in plain sight in your vehicle, either drugs or weapons, illegal weapons, and even legal weapons to some degree, they can search. If you're being detained, they can only search for officer or public safety reasons. Now, if it's an arrest, if you're getting arrested and you're in your vehicle, driving offense or outstanding warrants or whatever, then if the search is incidental to that arrest, then they can search as long as they have a reasonable belief that what they expect to find will be related to the reason for the arrest. And there are a couple of examples there. Arrested for drugs, they can search for drugs within reason. They don't get to, tear the entire vehicle apart. If they want to do that, they can get a warrant. But they can search essentially within the cab of the vehicle. So same thing. verbally, object to the search. If they're going to persist in doing the search, let them doing because they're going to do it. And trying to stop them from doing it beyond verbally objecting could result in you coming to more harm and things escalating, and we certainly don't want that to happen. Next slide, please, madam.
Can I just add on quickly about the verbal objections? I know maybe some people are feeling like, so what? I verbally object and it doesn't mean anything. I just want to reinforce that when you actually do verbally object, and if there is, behavior, inappropriate behavior or actions by law enforcement at that point, that helps you in the future. So really being able to document that, yeah, I objected to that, and that helps protect you, even though maybe it's not going to help you. Got to say it anyway.
Thanks, Renee. Yeah, a lot of times the courts want to see that you asserted your rights to some degree, and that it was clear. And it also prevents those situations where police officers say, well, they gave me permission. They interpret that because you didn't say anything, or, she nodded when I said, can I search? If you very clearly say, I don't want you searching my blank person, vehicle, bag, whatever, very clearly say it. I don't want you searching that. I object to this search. It's more difficult for the police in the future to say that you agreed in some fashion, and it's easier for the court to look and say this person asserted their rights. So thanks. I love Renee's additions. Providing a sample of your breath. So generally, since December of 2018, police have been allowed and have the power to, if they stop anybody driving for a valid reason, speeding, license checks, whatever, they have the right to demand breath. It's called the mandatory screening device, MSD, or sorry, mandatory alcohol screening, MAS. And they can ask for breath from anybody driving a motor vehicle. They don't need a valid reason. They don't need suspicion that you've been drinking. They don't need anything. They need to have stopped you validly. If you refuse to provide a sample, you will be charged. You'll be charged with essentially the same offense as impaired driving. The charge is very similar. The consequences are very similar, except if you refuse to provide a breath sample, the consequences are actually harsher. Instead of a mandatory minimum $1,000 fine, it's a mandatory minimum $2,000 fine. You still get a 1-year driving prohibition. So not providing a sample of your breath is not a good idea. Renee made a very good point when we were chatting before the meeting today. Right now, with COVID and the social distancing and the concerns about transmission of virulent disease that that we don't know enough about. What should we do now? Normally, with a mandatory alcohol screening device test, that's at roadside. Hi, driver, blow into this. With those, you don't have the right to call a lawyer before it happens. The Supreme Court has said that because it's a transient, low-level infringement on individual rights, that you don't get the right to a lawyer at that time. Now, if you blow and fail, and you're being taken back for a breath test at the office or at the check stop bus or whatever it is, you'll be able to call a lawyer before that. But the roadside one, you don't have the right to call a lawyer before it. That's suspended and it's allowed. Now, with COVID, what's changed? Legally, nothing has changed. If you refuse, you could be charged. Now, some things to consider. If you refuse, you're in the province of Alberta, you're automatically going to get a license suspension. So some things that you need to balance out. If you refuse to blow into this roadside device, you're going to get your license suspended. You're going to get charged with a criminal offense that has a mandatory minimum $2,000 fine and 1-year license suspension. If you blow, do you run the risk of catching something from the instrument if it's been used by other people? So far, Calgary police suspended the mandatory breath sample. Yep. No, that's fantastic. That news was overdue and hugely important. And the reason it's hugely important is because in Alberta, the device that's used is called the FST, Alka-Sensor FST. The FST has a plastic tube that sits on the top of it, sort of like that. And the tube has one port where the air comes out. So if this is the tube, you blow into the yellow tube, it goes into the device, but it comes out the same way. So there's no way to get the air out of that device, to clean the inside of the device. Jan Semenoff is a former he's a guy out of Saskatchewan, is a former police officer, breath tester, and he's now a recognized expert in breath testing. And he said that that they're terrible, and there's no way to clean that out. So the only thing that you could do is you can clean the outside of it, but the valve on the inside, or the chamber on the inside where the breath goes, there's no way to get into that. So the only thing you could do is wait the 3 days or whatever they're saying is appropriate now for the virus to die. All of that factors in to decisions like Calgary Police Service decision to suspend mandatory screening samples for present. They'd received a directive, as I understand, like 5 months ago or something, that every driver stopped would be asked for a breath sample. So they've suspended that now, which is great. And it's not just for the safety of the citizen. The FST, when that air goes in and comes back out the top, it ports out the top, and it blows on the officer's hand and on their arm. So it's not just the driver that's at risk; it's also the officer. And I'm really glad that Marilyn and the rest of the board and the CPS themselves have decided to suspend it. My understanding is that most police agencies across Canada are either suspending or reducing their reliance on the mandatory alcohol screening, which is good. So ultimately, where does that put you? If a demand is made from you and you decide that the risks, because you don't know how secure the device is, you don't know how safe it is, and if you suck in on the instead of blowing, if you suck in, there isn't a valve that protects you from inhaling, whatever somebody else blew into it. So if you decide that for whatever reason you don't want to blow because the risk is too high, you need to understand that you're likely going to have your license suspended. You're likely going to get charged with refusing to provide a breath sample pursuant to a lawful demand. Now, what'll happen after that? The suspension is going to be in place. You can challenge it. You can provide a defense to the criminal charge of failing to provide a sample, but that's going to cost time and money. And legally, I can't tell you not to provide a sample. That's a criminal offense, and I can't, neither I nor any of the lawyers I work with could counsel anyone ever to not provide a sample. It's prohibited. So when Renee and I were talking before, we decided to let you know some of the consequences, some of the consequences. So we'll move it from if you're the driver of the vehicle to if you're the passenger of the vehicle. If you're a passenger in a vehicle that's stopped, generally you're not detained. You're free to go. Police officer routinely fish for information. Who are you? You know, driver, give me your license, registration, insurance. Cool. Passenger, what's your name? And a lot of times, relying on that, you know, this need that most of us have, or at some point, to cooperate and to be polite, we try to answer questions, whether we think that, you know, we've got nothing to hide, we're not involved. So we'll answer. Recommendation is not to. And the reason is, you don't know what the police are looking for. If the driver of the vehicle is a suspect in a drug investigation, all of a sudden on the file, you provide your name, I provide my name, Chad Haggerty. Now, in the police file, Chad Haggerty will be entered as an associate of the driver who's a suspect in a drug investigation. Probably not a big deal, but it could be. I've seen warrants issued on that. So someday police come and knock on my door. So previous rules apply. Am I free to go? Am I being arrested or detained? Why? I want to talk to a lawyer. Lawyer told me not to talk to you. Okay. So next one is from the vehicle to your home. So if they're at their home, if they have a warrant, they can go in because a judge or a justice or JP has said so. If they don't have a warrant and they want to come in your home, first of all, if a police officer knocks on your door, don't open your door. There's no reason to. Talk to them through the door. If you have to raise your voice, so be it. If there's a window that opens near your front door, go to that window, open it up, and what can I do for you? And don't let them in. If they try to enter your home, if you do answer the door, open it up and go, oh, hey, hello, cop. Now what? If they try to step in, object. Yes, hold on, I haven't invited you in. You're not allowed in. If anybody watches vampire movies or vampire shows, and vampire shows, you know, they can't cross the threshold unless you've invited them in. Same thing with police officers. Treat them like vampires. Don't throw garlic at them. I'm kidding. But don't let them in. Don't invite them in. And explain, you're not allowed in my home. If they do step in your home, I want you to leave. I haven't invited you in my home. You're not welcome in my home. Please leave. Object. If possible, video record all their interactions. Ultimately, if a police officer decides they're going to come in your home, don't try to physically stop it. Yeah, don't throw garlic or salt at police officers. If a police officer is going to come in your home, don't try to physically stop them. It's going to escalate the situation. It's going to become physical, and ultimately the police officers are the ones with the taser, baton, pepper spray, guns. Let's stay safe, record it, deal with issues later, either individually through public complaints or through lawyers. Now, next screen, it's really simple. If they do have a warrant, that means the judge has agreed that they have reasons to be in your home. You can ask to see the warrant. You're entitled to see the warrant. It lists where they can search, what they're searching for, etc. If they go outside of those limits that are on the face of the warrant, you can't stop them. They're going to do it. Take note, object. Warrant says you can only look in these rooms. You know, you're looking in other rooms, you should stop. But again, verbally object, but don't try to physically stop them. And again, this comes back to what Renee was saying earlier. If you've essentially put it on record, quote unquote, if you've asserted your rights and they breach them, it makes it worse for them, and it makes it easier to deal with in the past. So unless they arrest you or tell you can't leave, you are free to go. Recommendation: go, leave, go away. And the reason is really simple. You could sit there and watch them. There's a chance that things will escalate. If you leave, it's not going to escalate. Police are still going to do what they're going to do. leave, call a lawyer. If it's your house, you're probably going to be arrested and told to stay. If it's not, if you're just visiting a friend and it happens, get out. If you call a lawyer, call somebody, let them know what's going on. And that's it. So the next screen is, so again, if they have come into your house and you haven't invited them, tell them to leave. If they don't, again, you're not going to be able to do much to force them out. You can't, escort them out the same way that a bouncer would at a bar, or that you would normally be able to do with anybody else in your home. This is where you become a good witness. Record if possible, deal with issues afterwards when you're safe. Delita asks about public spaces like libraries. If you want to type the question, I'll answer it in a moment. So if police officers enter your business, so like a bar, if it's your business, you're a landlord, you have the right to require anybody to leave, including police officers. If they have no warrant, same thing applies. You're not welcome, get out politely. And if they do have a warrant, you have to allow them to search. And again, the same rules as if they're searching in your home. Sorry, I am skipping through these ones really fast because I want to make sure that you guys can leave in the next 9 minutes. So if you get assaulted by a police officer, what do? The first thing is, don't resist, don't fight back. And that sounds counterintuitive, and on a personal level, I would struggle to do it. But if you fight back, the police officers are going to escalate things. If they say that you're resisting, they can use a certain level of force. If you start fighting back, they can use a higher level of force. And ultimately, police officers have guns, and I don't want anybody to get shot. So don't fight back. State that you're not resisting. State, I'm trying to cooperate, or I am cooperating. If there are other people around, the officers might be saying things like, stop resisting, stop resisting. And what the police officer is trying to do is create witnesses. And the witness can go, stop resisting. Oh, the person must be resisting. If you were saying things like, I'm trying to cooperate, or I am cooperating, or I'm not resisting, that's it. It again, you are trying to create witnesses. Yeah, absolutely. Officers are trained to say stop resisting, essentially no matter what. And that's the whole point. And I remember the class in 1993 when I was in training, when they're like, create witnesses, say stop resisting. If you see a knife, yell knife, 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 so that witnesses could do that. So witnesses can be created that say, yeah, then the officer told him to stop resisting, and then the officer kept hitting him, so the guy must have kept resisting. Don't fight back. Create witnesses. And then if you need medical attention afterwards, ask for it immediately. If you ask a police officer, you're in their custody and you ask for medical assistance, they have to provide it to you. So Julita asks, witness police officers physically removing people, more predominantly Indigenous youth, from libraries, removed for something like sleeping. What can you do? So public libraries are similar to bars in the sense that the owner of the place, or the caretaker, or the custodian, or whoever, security guards, if they're tasked with that, can ask anybody to leave for any reason. Now, is that always fairly applied? Absolutely not. So again, create witnesses, be a witness, let them know that you're, I don't think you're acting fairly, or what have you. And then if you have issues with what's going on, again, record it if possible, if you think it's appropriate. This happened about 3 weeks ago. Myself, a friend of mine, who's a lawyer out of Ontario, was here, and um, Transit Authority were being wonderful with an Indigenous male. So we both stepped up, and my friend is obviously Indigenous. She very clearly is Indigenous, and I look like the bald white guy. So we stood there. She started recording. We were both, quite vocal, and they toned things down a little bit. But then they came over to us and tried to flex on us, tried to exert authority. And eventually, was like, "Listen, I'm an ex-cop. Both lawyers. Like, bugger off. Stop it." Now, do I recommend anybody else does that? No, I've got a unique skill set. Wait, that sounds like that stupid movie. I've got experience and knowledge that's unique, and I understand what my risks are, and I know what I'm willing to take. So, all right, we are bumping up on 5 minutes, and I do want to get to the point where we talk about the complaint procedures. So we've talked about the right to interpreter. So how to complain about police conduct. So under the Provincial Police Act, and everybody in Alberta has 1 year from the date. It says Albertans, but it's anybody dealt with by police in Alberta, whether or not you're from Alberta. Have 1 year from the date of the incident to complain about misconduct. Under the RCMP Act, you have 1 year from the date of the incident to complain about RCMP misconduct. So the purpose of complaining is, there are a couple of purposes. The first is discipline. The remedy that Renee mentioned off the top, we want it dealt with. We want them corrected. If they're not going to engage themselves in a proper fashion out of respect for the law, we want them disciplined, and we want them doing the right thing out of fear of somebody complaining and taking them to task, and that adds to the accountability of our policing organizations. Ultimately, at the end of the day, police are here to serve the public, and I don't mean serve the public in the sense of providing a service. They're here at our whim, they're here at our pleasure, and they're supposed to be doing things in our best interest. So that's one avenue. Did talk about lawsuits a little bit. Generally, if you're going to pursue a lawsuit, it's 2 years from the date of the incident. So you have that long. There are a couple of things to consider. 2 years seems like a long time. 1 year seems like a long time. When we're talking about Indigenous people being removed from the library, Robinson referred to the fact that they're still traumatized by things that have happened. And dealing with trauma is one thing that you have to consider when that 1 year or 2 year time frame is in play. It seems like a long time, but it isn't, because dealing with these things at the time and after the time is difficult. I mentioned off the top that I suffered from PTSD, and I don't say I suffered past tense. It's present. I still deal with PTSD and the trauma from things that I've experienced. How it manifests is very different, and hopefully within the 1 year or within the 2 years, you're able to be at a point where what you dealt with, or what you dealt with either individually, personally, or vicariously through a friend or acquaintance, hopefully you dealt with it to the point. So seek help, reach out to people that you trust, reach out to Renee, reach out to various agencies in your community that will allow you to take the next step. And if you're not the one who's immediately impacted by it, if you're not the one who was dealt with by the police or by security agencies, be somebody that others will go to, and assist them, help them find the resources. If you don't know what the resources are, reach out to us, and we will certainly help. At least weekly, I see an email from Renee calling out to her network of people to assist somebody. There was one the other day. Somebody needed something. It went out, I think it was like 8 minutes before Renee got an email back and the needs were addressed. So under the Alberta Human Rights Act, apologize, where is it? If you're, if you need to complain about police, one last thing, we don't need to go back. If we need to complain about police, if you Google the police agency and the complaint against officer, it will come up. In brief, Edmonton, you can do it online. Calgary, you have to phone a number. That's easy to find. Lethbridge, pain in the ass. They want you to submit it in writing. So, but they will accept by email. So if you're in Lethbridge or dealing with Lethbridge Police, send an email to the Lethbridge Police Service. And if it's RCMP, you can contact any RCMP detachment to complain about any RCMP officer. Yep, Marilyn points out commission website for the Calgary Police Service has a complaint access, and it's an online complaint with Calgary Police Service. Thank you for that, Marilyn. Now, Alberta Human Rights Act. So police must not discriminate on any of the identified criteria. And currently, race, religious beliefs, color, gender identity, gender expression, physical disability, mental disability, age, ancestry, place of origin, marital status, source of income, family status, or sexual orientation. So the limitation to make complaint to the Alberta Human Rights Authority is 1 year from the date of the discrimination. So 1 year from the date of the incident with police. And if any of these things happen, it doesn't have to result in a criminal charge. If it happens at all, you can make the complaint. And if I'm not mistaken, with the Alberta Human Rights Act, can you make, Renee will know this answer, can you make a third-party complaint under the Alberta Human Rights Act?
Yeah, you can file a complaint on behalf of somebody as long as you have their consent.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So for those of us, and we did discuss that when my friend and I saw the incident on with Calgary Transit Authority. We obviously didn't talk to the individual, didn't get consent, and didn't take the next steps. Next slide, please. So you can request your information from the Edmonton Police Service under the Freedom of Information Privacy Protection of Privacy Act and the Privacy Act. So under FOIPA, you have a 60-day time limit from the date of the violation to make a request. Under the Privacy Act, you can request your information from the RCMP. Now, if you're beyond the 2 months, you can still make the request. Most of the information kept by police agencies is kept for far longer than 60 days. Some stuff will be automatically purged. Other stuff will be kept for a long time. Why would you want to collect the information? You want to collect the information so that you can hold police accountable for their actions. If you're if you've got a complaint against them or a lawsuit against them, you're going to probably need to do these things. Sometimes there's a cost associated for delivering the requested information. If you have any questions about that, contact Renee. I've done a few of these both personally and professionally. They're pain in the butt, but they can be incredibly useful. So that is our last slide. Sorry for the last 15 or so being, buzzsawed through. Thanks everybody for coming forward. I haven't provided Renee with the slide doesn't have, the PowerPoint doesn't have my contact information. Renee is more than welcome to share that. If anybody has a pen and paper handy, I'll give you my work email. Actually, I'll just write it in the thing here.
Well, and Chad, thank you so much for doing this with us this morning. I think talking police rights is such a critical one all the time. So really appreciate the opportunity and how you just allow people to be asking questions along the way. I think it just helps it to be relevant for everyone. And I appreciate everyone coming on board today as well. I have recorded this, so we will put it up in case you wanted to share it. And Nexie has said she's already going to get on that card for us with those four steps so that we can share that around. And I will share kind of like the complaint forms and relevant legislation to you afterwards, so you just have all the information. And with that, I think we're good. I think maybe the question is, and what people have been asking for is, maybe we need to consider doing something on Bill 10, but Chad, we can talk about that and what the possibilities could be and how we could do that afterwards if you want.
Absolutely.
Okay. So thank you everyone, and thanks for your patience and being a little bit over, but I think that was great, and we will see you all on Zoom sometime.
Take care, everybody. Thanks so much.